Hi all, it's day 184 on Bible 1 Year, and today and hopefully for a little while I'm going to do things a little differently. I'm going to do a bit of a quick look at each book that we're doing, for those who perhaps want to just have a quick sort of blast of Bible in 1 year, and I'm hoping to try and keep it under 5 minutes anyway, so we'll see how that goes. And for those who still want to need more feeding, then I'm going to carry on with what else I've had. So start off, I'm looking in Acts, and today we looked in Acts 22 and 23. Specifically today I want to have a look at the last verse we read today, which is 23 verse 11, and it's talking about how the Lord appeared to Paul and encouraged him, and saying how well he'd been a witness in Jerusalem and now he must preach the good news in Rome. And we read before that in chapter 20 verse 1 and 2, Paul had previously been an encourager to the believers and the followers of Jesus, or the way it was called back then as well. And so what I kind of felt it was saying to me is that there may be people at C3 and other churches that you belong to who are encouragers, who will encourage you, but to also remember to encourage them as well. That everyone needs support and just fellowship around them, and that's what the church is all about being together and fellowship and looking after another, encouraging each other, building each other up and worshipping God basically. So if someone has encouraged you recently, then perhaps go up to them and perhaps give them some encouragement, whatever way, whatever it is. And just remember what Paul said, or what Jesus said. Paul was talking about in Acts 20 verse 35, where he says it's more blessed to give than to receive. And this is a quote from Jesus, but it's actually not in one of the Gospels, but it's a fantastic bit of scripture anyway. So next we're looking at 2 Kings, and we're starting off in chapter 6 verse 24, and we're looking at the famine. And basically it was a famine because King Ben-Hadad of Aram was besieging Samaria, and what usually happened in these times, they usually headed for the aqueducts and the places where water and stuff like that, and tried to block them, build dams, try to destroy them, poison them, and so the town then would struggle and suffer and then become weak, and so it'd be easier then to attack basically. And we hear that how prices of like a donkey's head, for example, was 80 pieces of silver, and dove's dung, a cup of dove's dung was sold for about 5 pieces of silver. And the dung was usually sold at that time for fuel, but during sieging times, when we read in Isaiah 36, how people end up, prophet says about how people eat dung because the situation is that bad. And so we see things getting pretty bad in Samaria and Israel. And just want to remind you that it doesn't matter how much money some people or anyone has, that if there's famine in the world, and if there's famine in the UK, God forbid that'll ever happen, but if there's famine in the world and the UK, no matter how much money you have, you can't have any food. And just remember that. It's something I taught earlier on, being at C3, something I once spoke about before. I thought it was quite eye-opening really, that you never really think, oh, I can always get food from somewhere, and if there's no food and no water to grow the crops, then we're going to struggle. But we read later on that how it ends up being that the price of the markets drop, and food becomes a lot cheaper, and just basically talking about the blessing of God, which is amazing to receive a blessing of God in such a great way as well, that Elisha prophesies this, and it comes true, that flour will only cost 1 piece of silver, and a barley grain will only cost 1 piece of silver. So it's just fantastic stuff, and it comes true literally pretty much not that long after we finished reading chapter 7. And finally I want to look at Proverbs, and 16 verse 8, where it says it's better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest, and just following on really to, it's never all about money, and it's better to be with God than to have money. Word Jesus says that you can't serve both money and God, and so choose God every day. For those who are shooting off, God bless you, and I'll see you soon. Right, so I'm going to carry on with 2 Kings, and I want to look at the burlap that King Joram, I think, puts on, because basically he hears about the awful story about the 2 women who collude and basically say that we'll kill your son because we're starving. That's how bad it was, that there was nothing around, no one could afford anything, and so fortunately they agreed to it. They did it with one son, and then the other mother didn't want to go ahead and do it, and so told the king about it, and the king was really distraught. But I thought it was quite interesting that when he was upset about it, and he tore his clothes in despair, and as the king walked along the wall, people could see that he was wearing burlap under his robe next to his skin. I thought it was interesting that when he decided to walk around showing he was wearing burlap, he still had his king's robes on, so he still had a bit of pride and wanted to show he was still king. Usually a lot of people that wore burlap put it there basically like a sack, and just put it on there and then, and perhaps just to show remorse and how upset they were at the situation, but he still had a little bit of pride at that point. And Elisha basically gets blamed about this basically siege, for 2 reasons. One, because Elisha spared them. We read in verse 6:22, really let them go. And then also the city was in danger because Ben-Hadad had a thing against him. We read that in 6 verse 13. And so the king is after Elisha, and we read in 6:32, and but he's a man of God, and he hasn't done actually anything wrong, and as most people do, they try and find someone to blame straight away, and Elisha was this man, unfortunately. And it's just, I want to explain why basically the king of Samaria was after him, or Israel. We look at the lepers, where they suddenly find that the army had soon scattered, and they decide to gorge themselves in all this this food and this priceless metal basically, and then they suddenly realise that it is wrong actually to take it all and keep it all to themselves, and it is, as they say, is a day of good news, and we aren't sharing it with anyone. If we wait until morning, some calamity will certainly fall upon us. Let's go back and tell the people at the palace. And so it takes a lot to do that. I thought, lepers who were outcasted by the society at the time. And so it follows on what Paul said. I said earlier that it's better to give than to receive. And so God would have blessed him for doing that. Perhaps he got healed later on, I don't know. But it's pretty impressive, I think, that they went and did that instead of saving it for themselves. And we read then in finally about basically the blessing of God in verse 16, where it does come true that the flour and the barley grain become so cheap, and which is just amazing, really. And next I want to go back to Acts and look at basically in verse 28, 22 verse 26 to 28, and we hear about the Roman Roman centurion, and he's talking to Paul, and Paul says, stop trying to beat me because I'm a Roman citizen. And we read the comment where the commander says, yeah, I am too, but then he muttered, and it cost me plenty. And what that kind of meant is that back at one point you could actually buy to be a Roman citizen, and I think you can do that in a lot of countries now. For example, in Australia, if you want to move across there, say if you haven't got a particular trade that they're currently looking after, if you're willing to go into the country and invest a certain amount, you can go into the country and then, I guess, eventually become a citizen as well. So it still happens today as well. And so, but obviously it cost a lot of money to do this, and obviously he was a little bit like sort of, it's cost me a fortune, like, you know. And Paul obviously may have picked up on this and said, no, generally I am, you know, a Roman by birth. And at first I had a little look into it, I thought it was quite interesting. And finally we look into when Paul is being persecuted basically at the High Council, and he decides, or the Holy Spirit perhaps works in him and realises the Sadducees and the Pharisees in there are there. And the Sadducees didn't believe in a resurrection, but the Pharisees did. And so the council becomes divided, and it follows on where Jesus says in Matthew 12:25 that any kingdom divided by civil war is doomed, and that family and towns are splintered by feuding will fall apart. And this happens in here. And it created a divide and allowed Paul to take him back to the fortress, give him a break, and then he gets encouraged by God, which is amazing. And then Proverbs, we go back to, I think Proverbs are fantastic today. I decided to read some of the bits a little bit differently, and where it said talks about a king, like some of them I sort of replace that and as it, or use it as King Jesus. And I liked verse 15 where I rewrote it, perhaps, you know, maybe as when King Jesus smiles there is life, his favour refreshes like a spring rain. I just thought it was a different way of looking at it. God bless, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.